All right, welcome everybody to the March 31st Octant community meeting. We have a nice, short and sweet today. We are in the middle of our ODOT 19 sprint, which is we're hoping to release on April 7th, as mentioned last week. Progress on that's pretty good. We intentionally kept it, scoped to a minimum set of issues that were missed for ODOT 18, but that people really wanted to see, plugin authors and some other folks wanted to see available sooner than like a standard 3 to 4 week release cycle. So we're doing that shorter one on the 7th to get some of those features out. And that work is progressing pretty well. I think we have 3 or 4 PRs up at the moment. Let's look. Yeah, there's a PR for the signpost implementation, pull request for the plugin state, and some new ones actually that came in yesterday and today that I haven't even looked at. So yeah, things are looking pretty good. Forms refactoring, which is one that I know a lot of people are interested in. Anyway, I had my first vaccination shot yesterday. I think I'm like very groggy and like still a little like feeling the effects of it, but a little lower energy than normal. So let's see, back into what we're going to talk about. Nightlies. Yeah, they were broken. Sam fixed them. I think, was that yesterday, Sam, or are they fixed for tonight?
They were fixed for yesterday. So everything before yesterday is bad. And I think our retention period is like 5 days, I believe. It's either 5 or 30. I don't know. I might have the numbers crossfired. But regardless, if you're looking for a nightly, just note that there's going to be a blackout period probably for the last week, because this broke since we did the migration to Go Embed, and we didn't fix this for Go Releaser.
Yeah, I think it is. I want to say it's a week that we keep. Yeah, looks like we just hit the the time. So like they've been broken since the 23rd or the 24th. We had a successful one on the 23rd, and they got fixed on the 31st. So it was just, yeah, they were just about to fall off and have nothing in there. So it was good. At least there was the 23rd one in there still. So that's good. Yeah, thanks for fixing that, Sam. Let's see. And then I don't really have any. Does anyone else from the team have anything they want to add before we move on to the demo from Sam? All right. Well, then we'll move on to Sam's graph demo and brainstorming.
All right, cool. So I will take over for a second here. Let me share a screen. And let's see. I think this is good enough. Cool. All right, so let's talk about graphs, because this is something that we've talked about in Octant before. Let me actually just get to the interesting part, so then we can have it for clickbait purposes. This is a graph on Octant. It's new. It's got buttons, and it's got titles and legends, and it's got on hover things. And this is all fake data. So this is like statically rendered data. This is not particularly exciting. But this is just kind of to show that it's kind of trivial to get a plot up and running with a graphing library onto Octant. Well, not trivial. It took like maybe 2 hours, but it like once it's up, it's kind of self-supported, right? Like it's just like you just install the module and you just register the component and the export in it, and it works. So the reason why this, for context for anyone who's marching, the reason why we actually haven't jumped on like something like this sooner, whether it's this plotting library or another, is really because of the way Octant works, right? Like if I'm looking for, say, like something like CPU usage over time, that chart is only going to be useful as long as I have Octant running. And if I'm using it locally, I'm not going to have that CPU data unless we have some sort of sink somewhere to store that data. And that's just a whole other set of concerns that we've never really wanted to tackle, at least not at the stage that we really thought about this, like probably maybe like half a year to a year ago. But now I kind of want to revisit this a little bit, right? Because the idea is that even though there might not be Kubernetes specific things that are useful in the context of a graph, there might be other things that people might be using. Like this could be a plugin thing, right? Like it doesn't necessarily have to be metrics or something Kubernetes related, right? Like something super basic that we could come up with theoretically is like as a proof of concept. It's like if we go to events or something. Well, I have no events, but if I had events here, maybe I do have some in cluster overview, or maybe not. Let's see, events. No, maybe I just don't have any events. But like if let's say I had an event, right? So let's see if I can even force something to happen here. Like, I don't know, let's say I go to this pod and I delete it, and hopefully this creates an event. Cool. So now there's an event, right? Maybe we could have something like a histogram, right, where we kind of show these events, and it could be useful if there's a crash loop backoff somewhere. Then the events for a crash loop backoff would pile up super high, right? So like there are things we can do already that might not necessarily rely on persistence. But the idea here is one, it's kind of like if we have something like this, I think we're going to need to think about two things, right? One is how do we make sure that this rendered graph renders that same data even after the user navigates away from the page, right? So even after this graph component that we'd be using is destroyed and recreated, is there a way to persist that data between views, right? So if I go back like to that, say that dummy chart there, so let's say I go to our pods and go back into our tab here, right? Like if this were not static data, would I be guaranteed to see this data again? And currently with our implementation, probably not. Like we'd probably need some sort of Angular service that registers every single plot that's been rendered before. Like maybe we create like a hash map with like the key being some random hash that maps to each chart that's been generated before, and then like the data that it's shown, and then like we kind of diff the data the next time it gets shown again. So it's, I guess like it's harder, it gets hard very quickly once we start thinking about not static data, right? Or we start thinking about this in a real world use case. So I guess what I want is like, is this something we want to invest on like now-ish? Like, is this the right time to start talking about this? Maybe we always say like, oh, we could throw this into design doc, and we could certainly do that as well. But I just want to see like what if there are any thoughts on like, like is there like something that we think that should have a graph right now in Octant that doesn't have one, and maybe we should just put that in there. It doesn't necessarily have to be exposed in the form of a plugin component either, right? Like we could even just start small and use it internally, like think of spots within Octa that it could be useful. And then over time, we can slowly start to expose the API through a plugin user, since it'd be a little bit easier to think about than going right off the bat. And the cool thing about it, and this one, I'm using something called Plotly, which is kind of cool. I've used Plotly before back in the Python days with Jupyter Notebooks. They make some really nice interactive graphs just out of the box. And they've got a nice Angular library here, and the installation instructions are they're not straightforward, but like if you want to try this, I could also push this up as a branch somewhere. But if you really wanted to try this yourself, you want to make sure to do it through Plotly via window module as the installation, because of the way that we compile our TypeScript, this is probably the most straightforward way to do it. Otherwise, you're going to run into a lot of like transpile type errors in the console. And you can kind of compare this to like, say, NGX charts. This one ultimately is a more popular library, and this one is even more lightweight. So Plotly is a very expensive library to use as well. So like that's also another consideration. Like this bumps our bundle to well over 3 megs, whereas this one is an SVG library, so it's much more lightweight, and it's still pretty nice. I mean, like I see like the demos on StackBlitz, but I guess what I'm saying here is that like I'm not particularly inclined to use any particular chart library since we don't actually know what charts we want in the first place. So that's where I want to start. Like figure out what charts we want, then from there to see if there are any chart libraries that might support. And I'm pretty sure like most of these are pretty good. Like it might just be a moot argument to like pick one over the other. But like if there's a specific chart that's supported on one and not the other, maybe this is something we want to get right from the get-go. And then from there, we can talk about plugins and see if plugin authors have something to say about this. So that's it in a nutshell. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Let me know if you have any feedback on this. I can also push this code somewhere for people who want to try it. But I want to start playing around with the sync idea, just a rudimentary concept to see if I can try to get like dynamic data feeding through this and like start persisting data between views. I think that'd be a next step. That'd be kind of a fun code thing to think about. So that's it. Are there any questions about what I did here? It's not a lot, honestly. It's just more of a, more just feedback, questions, comments, concerns type of thing.
No, I think this is I think it's really neat. I think it's something that, like you said, we've talked about a couple times, kind of casually, but never really gave thought to it. I think as we start to invest more in the local, in the application experience, I think we can start to I think we'll have a better ability to connect to services that can provide data like this. I do think we want to avoid storing. We want to avoid being the data store for any like time series data or anything like that. But I really like the idea of providing kind of the building blocks for people and saying, here's, just like we do with I think we have like the donut, right? Like the donut started out as an internal thing, and then it got added so that plugin authors could use it, and then it got extended, so now you can change thickness and colors and all of these, right? And so like I like the idea of finding something internal to Octant that we feel would improve the overall user experience by representing it as a chart or graph, and then bringing that in, and then exposing it to plugins, and then exposing extra features on it. And just like that process, I think worked really well for a lot of the various components that we had to Octant, right? We put it in Octant first, and then we expose it to plugins, and then we extend its capabilities. I think we could probably do that here as well, like identify one, do it, and then can like just continue to expand on that. I talked to Milan. Milan's out this week, but I talked to him last week before it was last week or the week before, about, because Milan had previously worked on like a data visualization library, and I talked to him about creating, like thinking about some of those ideas from that data viz library, and what areas of Octant might benefit from some of that as well. So I think I don't know if now is the time to like invest heavily in it. I think we have some other things that are more important and more critical path for us right now. But I think starting to document our investment, like starting to document some of these things, starting to create proof of concepts and prototypes and like use some of our times experimenting and researching and learning things to like investing some of that time into the adding features like this document, I think is a good use of time. I think in the past we've talked about it and showed them and but that never really went, like having a working demo always seems to take things a lot further than just like saying, oh yeah, that would be nice. So I think the fact that you have like a skeleton of like, hey, here's Plotly embedded into Octant. Okay, now it's much easier for someone to like someone to come in and say, okay, this specific type of plot would be useful. I'm going to take Sam's example and add it to Octant, like make a PR to officially add it to Octant. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, and this is just more, I think, for anyone who is watching this either from like the YouTube stream or later through a recording. I don't think there's anyone else on the call right now, but I think this is just a general call out, right? Like, I think the idea is that we want to shy away from like metrics. Like we don't want to like say like, oh, we have a Prometheus view inside Octant, right? Like that's probably not what we're shooting for, since that's, well, for one, it's probably those metrics but would concern more of a cluster operator than a developer, but also for the reasons we talked about earlier, right? Like it's hard for a ephemeral desktop application to make a meaningful use of those charts somewhere, unless we start thinking about how to ingest a bunch of data at once, which also doesn't seem quite correct. So it's really more like, if there were charts, like what would we be showing? I think at the end of the day, I think we need to boil back down to what is the problem we're trying to solve, rather than just saying, here are charts, go have fun. So just a general call for brainstorming, and of course, like always feel free to open issues or ping on Slack, because generally, right, the only way that we know how to invest in more into a particular feature is to get that input. Otherwise, we kind of in a way, like our hands are tied with like the last thing that's been requested by someone else. So anyway, that's all I got for today.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Sam. Like for how we might use this in Octant, that's different than, I think the here's a bunch of components, go have fun is the correct approach for plugins, right? Because people are creating plugins that I would have never even thought of to create, and they want to use the components in ways that I never even thought of using them. So I think that the like providing a toolkit for plugin authors and making that toolkit be very customizable and flexible is an important part of the plugin offering. But I think avoiding the like we can't do that necessarily for, or we don't want to be doing that for the views that we are creating in Octant. We don't just want to start adding charts and graphs just because we can. Yeah, they need to actually serve a purpose and be useful. So I agree with that. But it is still useful to have them similar to like how we add clarity components that we might not necessarily use in Octant, just so that plugin authors can have access to them. I think that is still will be an important part of like charting graph stuff in Octant. Yeah, so I don't really have anything else. Was there did anyone who was working on any of the open PRs want to talk about them or demo them at all, or just put people on the spot? I'm okay with doing that.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm gonna demo the single button component for next week.
Okay, great.
I have some comments on Vikram's PR. I think it's like what 2244 plugin request state. I've been sitting on it. I've been like sitting on it back and forth. Like on one hand, it's like, yeah, it works the way that one would expect it to. And actually can share it. Real share screen since I'm talking about it right now. Desktop one plugin request states. Can everyone see that? Okay. There.
Might go, yeah, there you go. Might go a little bigger.
Yeah. So so generally the code reviews, I think that's just for the team since we're all here, right? Like I generally don't try to say like I don't like it without providing a better alternative. And in this case, I actually don't have one, which is why I haven't really said anything, and I've just sat on it and slept on it a little bit. But I think like one of the concerns I have, right, is kind of the way that we're doing plugin state, right? Like we're doing state.getFilter, state.get namespace. And really we could even just extend this logic further, right? Like if we go into, let me see if we can do this here. Nope. Yeah, actually we can. State.go. Oh, GitHub. State.go. Right. We see like stuff like I think it called what get namespace. Yeah, it called this get namespace, and then it probably called like the get filters. But really, we could extend it to say we want all of this, right? Like there will be a day where we could say, okay, what about context, or what about just a get content path, just as a handy method. And I'm just trying to think like long-term scalability, right? Like if I want to just have all of this. What would that look like? And it gets a little weirder because if we think back to our send alert pattern, right? Like we have this some actions, right? Things that do things with the current Octant state that requires a client ID, and we do this fancy hack to get the client ID from the request context, and then we send the alert to the given client ID, because that's the only way we'll know to send the correct alert. But this could also apply to some of these, but not all of these, right? Like, so for example, regardless of well, maybe that's not true. Yeah, I think actually I retract that. Like set context could be, you could have like different, you could have different instances of Octant on different contexts. And so a lot of these would end up using this same pattern. Same thing with set filters. So like on a lot of these methods that change something about the current Octant state, rather than reading it, they would also use a very similar pattern with what Vikram just did. And I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to even just at some point either refactor the code to just give the Octant state to a plugin and say, okay, you now have access to that WebSocket state, do whatever you want with it, since it's kind of the current connection already. So I think like there are two parts here. Like one, I think that PR is okay, but I could also see this in the long term being refactored completely, such that like we bump up this, because right now this is like in internal Octant, and that's probably why this is difficult to wire up, is because maybe we just need to move this into package. Yeah, we move this up to package, or we somehow have the WebSocket states ready as part. And really, this also goes back a level further. If we go into dash.go, the reason why this is hard is because of this file, which we always keep coming back to. Like every time something's hard, it's because of this file. Specifically, what I think it's like plugin API dot something. Yeah, here, right? So like this line 437 to 442 of this plugin dashboard service is kind of all of the internals of Octant that plugins have access to, right? And so the reason why we can't, or the reason why we don't have this, is because we have this WebSocket client manager, and then I believe we do stuff with a WebSocket client manager and this init plugin later, whereas we really just want whatever this WebSocket state that's been created by this method to be already part of this plugin service. So that's kind of where it's where I'm at right now. So it's kind of like, I don't want to be like Vikram, this doesn't work, because it does. But at the same
no.
time, I'm just thinking more long term about how we want this to look. So I think ultimately I'd probably, like, for this release, I really just don't want to mess with this, because I keep saying there's going to be a Dash.Go refactor, and I just haven't had either the motivation, or maybe I'm just not smart enough to do it, or combination of the above. So this is the problem that we're trying to solve. It's the way that Octant is running, not because the PR is bad. So anyway,
I'm really glad you brought it up, because when I was looking into, the different ways of implementing it, and I was tracking it, how state could be used to pass to plugins, I found the same thing, like API and the WebSocket client and plugins are initialized at the very top level, and it was kind of hard to pass off the state from 5 levels below all the way to the plugin manager. So I had encountered the same, and I didn't want to mess with that. But yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah, because I have faced
I
the same
could see
issue.
us. I could see us lifting up a like a state reader interface. So I think having an internal state interface there is still going to be useful. But I think then creating a state reader that exposes all of the Git options, right, at the package level, and then those are then hydrated underneath by the WebSocket manager, right? The client manager can then create all of the instances and everything that are needed underneath to then satisfy that state reader. That would be like the first refactor that I would consider when people go to, like, I don't think we should do that for this PR. I agree with Sam. I think that the the public APIs that we're creating to interact with this are good. It's more about the internal implementations that need to be refactored and worked out. But also we can change them. Like we're still pre 1.0. We can, as long as we announce them and make sure that people know that we're changing APIs and communicate it well, we can change them. Nothing's concrete yet. But yeah, I think getting that whole Dash.Go refactored is a process. it's already received, like it's happening in phases, which can make it like, it can seem like progress is not happening there, but even where it's at today, it's already easier to go in and start to extract more pieces and refactor more pieces. And I think we'll continue that effort. And we're just going to have to, the reason it's difficult to refactor that package is because it's central. It is the central package that wires everything together and creates all of the composition layers and instantiates all the dependencies and threads them through to the various things. And in some places we do a good job of keeping those things isolated, and like, here's your dependency, it gets injected here. And then in other places we're like, here's your dependency, it instantiates some stuff internally and then returns that to another thing that we injected, which then uses that internally. And so like we break the pattern, like we break that dependency injection pattern, and the layers of composition kind of fall down, and we leak, the abstraction kind of leaks a little bit. But it's getting better. I think parts of it have already been refactored in a way that is beneficial. But I think the whole init, we have this whole like init API, init loop, where we like we start and init and check and wait and do, and like with all of this communication and like the way we're doing it now is like a combination of like new approaches and shimmed old approaches. So yeah, it's not great, but it's getting better. And I think it's yeah, I agree with your assessment overall, Sam, and same for you, Vikram. Like, I think that what you all are seeing as you go in to approach some of these problems, and like them being difficult, and them being like it's a challenge to get that state information, that client information wired through into and surfaced in a plugin, is a direct result of this kind of legacy code that needs some care.
Yeah, so yeah, and just to extend on like that conversation a little further, right? There's also two other competing ideas with Dash.go. Like the first thing that we want to do is to make it more testable. This has been a pain point for some time. And the other piece of it is also we want Octant to run as a standalone server without any Kubernetes knowledge. Because then we can do some very plugin wise, some very interesting things can happen, right? Where like now you don't even need a kube config, you don't need Kubernetes, and you could even have, I think one of the ideas juggled was like, oh, you could even have Octant as a thing that creates clusters on kind, and you can have Octant as a thing that can kind of even very similar to like Spotify's Backstage, where you just kind of start like, it's like just a platform for people to build components on, and developers do whatever they want on it. And it just becomes this blank check for whatever people want to do. So those kind of tie hand in hand. I'm not sure what order they'll happen in. It'll happen eventually someday. Yeah. And I guess while we're also on the topic, I've also looked into the signpost PR as well. Actually both, since we're already talking about PR, so I think signpost looks mostly great. I think most of the time we're just nitpicks, like just making sure to catch, like making sure that, you know, like if someone like writes a signpost with a trigger badly, it doesn't panic. We just want to, you know, to avoid users from being able to break Octant just accidentally as much as possible. And then the other one for Felipe's PR with a create, I realize I'm not sharing my screen at all. The other one is Felipe's PR is create a util package to link components. And this one's kind of my fault. Like I told him there was two ways to do it. One, it was kind of like either you can generate the paths manually, like so, which I sat down and I looked at it and I was like, yeah, it probably for maintainability reasons, we probably just don't want to do something like this, even though it's probably easier to grok the first pass around. So I took advantage of, this still ties back to Dash.go, but I wrote a branch that does address some of these issues here. And this one, you can kind of see I inject a module manager in here, and that lets us do a create link, where is it? It creates link essentially using the module manager, kind of similar to how our new link components work. Yeah, like we can do this link generator.object path. So now we're using we expose the module manager indirectly to a plugin. And I think this will just this will just prevent any of the hard coded type of work needed, and just make things a little, it's essentially the same way the JavaScript plugin does it right now. And I think right now, the only thing that's missing is really like, what do we populate the new link with, right? So like, it's just missing some other methods to be exposed. So like if we want the link to have text or something, but I think for the most part, I prefer this method over the original, but I think either way works in the short term. Anyway, that's kind of it. That's all the stuff that I've had time to look at.
I have a question about the ad signing post. Okay. Well, let me share. Okay, so I realized that you have a comment here, and I agree with this comment. The main thing is I'm not very sure how to do this. I mean, like right now, I have to add this click me button because the only thing that happens when I gonna to make sure that people know the icon is clickable is that the cursor change. So yes, and that's what Sam point out here. But I'm not really sure what to do with that because we allow. I mean, like Clarity provides. It says that we have to use this type of icon, and as soon as if we change anything, it should become blue and like to make sure that and with hover, it should become blue. But at this point, adding the I was pretty much adding we can use any icon and we can put like we can set any color in the icon. So I was wondering if for this PR I should make it always gray, even if the user sent an icon or anything with a specific color, and just create a hover that will change the color of the icon as soon as somebody hover with the mouse. Does it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone has an opinion about it? Yeah.
Yeah. So the first comment is kind of tangential, but like we don't necessarily have, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be an icon based on how this works, right? That's also kind of something that's interesting to think about, right? Like, well, what if this isn't an icon, what would it be? I could definitely see this could be like something like, say, like for text almost, right? So like you could have like, say, kind of like one of those like define the text, right? Like let's say you want to have like a signpost with a message that just tells you what that piece of text means, right? That could be another use case for us. So like, but like there could be more that we haven't thought of, right? So like it's important to like generalize this not just to an icon, because for something like that, you're not going to have the click me message, right? The user would just kind of have to know that this is something they could hover and click for a signpost. The other piece here is, okay, what do we do, right? So like I think Clarity's recommendation is just to show blue on hover. I think that's reasonable. Like I'm not a designer by trade, and like so like there might be other like accessibility concerns or even a better way to do this that I don't have in my toolkit, right? But like I think like just leaving it the default color and like just have some change, so like just some element of discoverability, right? So like if it flickers to a different color as someone hovers over it, I think that's good enough for a first pass. Like we don't really need to bike shed this. And if people come back around and say, oh, I didn't know that this had a signpost, then that will be a feedback loop back for us to think about how to make this more discoverable, whether it's by bolding things by default or making the CSS change much in a more jarring way. So it's more, so it just grabs people's attention. But I think right now, just do the official Clarity recommendation. So if it's an icon, just give it that Clarity blue color, or even any component really, if it's possible, right? So like it might involve like some sort of CSS trickery to pass that into this, into the trigger component, but it's possible. I think that's, yeah. So does that answer the question? I know it's a kind of roundabout way, yeah.
Yes, I was thinking in doing something like different, like I don't know, to put a background different, or I was thinking in something like that, but I wasn't really sure on what to do. But if we can do that, just change the color to blue and that's it. I was thinking that make it jump, or I don't know, but I think that make the icon blue I think it would work. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And this also, this is kind of like a side note, but like signposts and Clarity are kind of interesting because like if you have them inside another component, it gets cut off. Like you can't really control the Z index of these signposts. So that's just also something to think about. It's not, so this is not in our control. So just kind of also like something to think about is like at some point we will have to issue like a guidance for how to use this pattern as opposed to hard coding it just simply because they're if people put signposts in a place where they can't be seen, that's not really our problem.
Yeah, I will actually have a question there as well. I think Clarity 5, we are on Clarity 5 now, isn't it? And at least it's on master.
Yep.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that, because I thought the Clarity 5 solved that problem of the hidden signpost, but I'm not completely sure. I can check it out.
If it does, actually, does have Octant running? That'd be news to me. I mean, that'd be kind of cool. I think the biggest complaint right now would be, let's see. I know like my screen is not being shared properly right now, but I'd have to come back to. Oh, maybe it does. Yeah, the biggest for the longest time, the object status was hidden, like was hiding our. If you go to like the check marks on our data grid tables, a lot of those signposts have been hidden under the data grid for the longest time, and it looks promising. So maybe it works out of the box, and that'd be kind of cool too.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, that was great discussion. Thank you, everyone. I think that covered actually all the open PRs that are in review status. So that was good. I don't have anything else. And so unless someone else does, we can call it. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. And as always, we will see you next week.